Viper's Den by Catherine and Red Ram, copyright 2009, as read by the author. Viper's Den, from the unromanticized life of Mahu, the ancient Egyptian sleuth. The ruckus alone would not have attracted Mahu's attention, but since the time of day was close to siesta, he would need a shady place to sit while the sun crossed its zenith. The tenement bar, which erupted in protests, would serve as well as any other. As a practical man, no station was beneath his presence, especially one which served beer. Mahu the soothsayer, himself a slave of the royal physician, had decided to take a shortcut through the eastern sprawl of Thebes, and, as usual, became lost in the tangle of alleys, themselves under constant construction. The common clans took advantage of a lack of city planning. With the local nomarch recently disgraced, they increased their custom of partitioning the areas not bounded by sentry walls of the temples and noble domiciles. Mud for brick was plentiful. In just a few evenings, a thoroughfare could be reassembled into a series of flats for 4 families. So was the ever-changing housing district for Egypt's migrant poor. The bricky squalor of Thebes would typically be sparsely populated during the day, only those infirmed by disease or sloth remaining behind in their homes. But the Nile was starting its long months of flood, so no work would take place in the fields. Instead, the locals would be of 2 types: those who while away their time drinking beer, and the piously dedicated who offered their labor to one of the various temple projects. In every civilization there were holiday Catholics who preferred that their gods purloin only part of the Sabbath. The rest of the time was theirs to worship in more sinful ways. Mahu broke up the disturbance with great bally, bellow, and belly. Tossing the shorter and slightly fairer Egyptians' peasants out of his way, he cleared a path to the brawl's center. A single vagrant motioned at him with a piece of sharpened goat horn, but his compatriot wisely intervened before that mistake led to the slaughter of the entire block by Pharaoh's relentless, avenging soldiers. "Idiot! That is Master Mahu, His Excellency Fentu's servant." The mention of the sinister royal physician's name, a man alleged to raise the dead on the western Nile shore, made all fall back and give way. A hiss of information resonated out through the mob. A number of the gathering slipped away as their fear overwhelmed their curiosity. When a royal eunuch like Mahu spoke in judgment, neither guilt nor innocence was usually of importance. Anyone's punitive role might be associated. Here, at least, their fears were unwarranted. Mahu was never one simply to lord over the miserable for his own pride and grandeur. He might have been singular among those holding power in his desire for actual justice. Though in the warped society of Egyptian laws, more often a corruptly criminal noble would expect lenience, while a guiltless commoner dare only plead for a painless death. "I am indeed Mahu, servant of great Lord Fentu, member of the royal palace." Between ebony fingers he clutched for all to see his fortune-telling deck, exposing card number 1, the mystic. The card's images were illustrated in patterns more customary of a land further to the south. The soothsayer pictured more closely matched the Nubian Mahu's flowing mane than his own priestly-shaven Egyptian master. Since none in the crowd could read the script, the image alone served as his badge. Those closest to his hand, as he motioned slowly around the crowd, flinched from the talisman. Renewed murmurs enveloped the gathering, along with hushes from those who delighted to hear. Mahu grinned his widely spaced and perfectly filed teeth as he sufficiently established his credentials. He became authority beyond question or quibble. A few more of the inquisitive found themselves skulking away, unable to face the dawning drama. "This my thief," responded the older bar owner Udium, A wretched Syrian with one eye disfigured and bulging since he was a teen, the result from a fight in which it was gouged. Udium secured an arm with a foot and yanked at a middle-aged woman's armpit hair, while an unnamed associate held her chin for Mahu to see. Bezrest's eyes tell deceit. The woman, Bezrest, obviously a prostitute on the waning half, if not the end of her career, had just suffered the beginning of what might have been many blows. She was not alone, as her supporters squared off, not fully yet prepared to intercede. Mahu took a quick look and counted their numbers. A riot would undoubtedly ensue, even as Bezrest's friends were outnumbered. Mahu waved Udium off of her. Bezrest stood on her own and pleaded for forgiveness and mercy. "They accuse me falsely. Protect me, priest. I am the one who's been slighted." Mahu scrutinized her. "I am not a priest. Be glad of that." Bezrest showed little harm from her abuse. She might have engendered some sympathy, but everything about her seemed base. Her plea rehearsed, she froze stiffly even after she spoke. Mahu had interrogated many liars, knowing their all too familiar stance, all effort concentrating on selecting obfuscating words. Bezrest moved nothing more than her mouth. She didn't even blink. Her rotund body, rivaling that of Mahu's own stately girth, seemed carved in stone. An ancient fertility goddess, she stood before him unclothed above the waist. Her breasts hung nearly to her belly-button, while below she wore only a bunched swath of gossamer. Bezrest acted like she had nothing to hide. Nor did she. "What have you," Mahu asked pointedly, "lost?" "My cache of metal. All last night gone. We must gut her. Find my silver she ate," Udium answered, himself twitching and flailing his hands in description. "A few tankards of beer, a few extra indulgences. If I can restore civility with a small tithe, let me do so," Mahu offered generously. "No, yesterday several big loans I collect. My entire hoard, my life taken. Make her give back." As if I could swallow such a quantity of shavings. Those trinkets were mine as well. My share was lost here too, you forget. You told me long ago we would build our wealth together. Bezrest had turned briefly to accuse Udium, but seeing she wasted her words, she addressed Mahu. "I am without my property as well, good master." She was obviously more articulate, which made Mahu suspect her words still more. Her voice was overconfident, revealing a wrong she had let quietly brood for years. Mahu looked first up at the endless blue sky, then down the dusty row of brick hovels. "We shall step inside, out of Aten's glow," Mahu informed the pair. "I have other questions before I consult the spirits." The remaining crowd took this as an invitation, and the entire cozy, solitary hall of the place was stuffed, while still others leaned in from the street. The discussion echoed from inside, repeated for those blocked outside. With the entrance crowded, Udium lit several candles to add a dull light. The bar hall had little adornment, a few pictures in monocolor red paste, mostly of fornication, a few exhausted rugs, barely more than the remains of worn towels, lay strewn about. There was no furniture, not even a bench. The only feature of any note was an oversized red clay urn resting in the center. Mahu could smell the beer contained within. "The details?" Mahu asked, after sitting with his legs sprawled out before him. If he had to lie down extended, he would have had trouble. The morals of the primitives who might patronize such a hole were minimal. But even so, Mahu reasoned that Bezrest could escape to any number of vacant buildings in the vicinity to entertain a shy prospect. Udium dipped for Mahu a pitcher of beer, leaning deeply into the center jar, as did Bezrest draw one of her own. She could not let her partner alone curry favor with their arbiter. 2 pitchers were just about Mahu's typical fee for a psychic reading. He downed both. The day was, after all, hot, he explained to those in awe of his thirst, before he let either speak to answer his first question. Besrest spoke first as Mahu pointed. For 60 seasons and 20 passing floods or more, we have collected our fees, and each night dropped the shavings into this pit below the keg. She wrestled the jar, feigning great difficulty, yet Mahu could see her fingers lightly gripped the clay vessel as she tilted it away. Sometimes, when our succor is back from loans, we stash it all down below. Udium came here last night and dumped a sack of our profits. My profits, Udium interrupted. He inspected the contents himself. All was fine then. Mahu looked over at Udium as the man curled his lip and looked away. He did not dispute her claim that the valuables were safely contained the night before. Many of my customers come here knowing they can look below on the copper and silver sheen, watching each evening's treasure build. While the fee goes in that pit, they enjoy this one here. She finished by pointing at her gossamer garment. Several of her regular customers laughed at her quip. Some of those who, out in the street, had condemned her, were now questioning their involvement. Maybe she was innocent. Mahu did not interrupt. He knew the man would explain why both thought such a moronic and open bank vault was secure. Snakes. I toss them rats. Part fun. Sensing he was losing his argument, Udium wished he could explain himself. He grew frustrated and barked a few expletives in his native language, which Mahu understood without specific translation. Yes, we bet on which one will be eaten first. Thanks to our clan chieftain and the protection of Pharaoh, we do not fear occupation by armed brigands. Still, over the years, some have tried to filch a piece, but they meet a shift end. She took my shake. Mahu understood the colloquialism as collateral. Where? You can see what I am wearing. You can see I have nothing to hide. Mahu gave her a thoughtful gaze. Her answer was again practiced. She knew this accusation would be leveled, but still her point was well received. She could not have concealed anything more than a few trinkets in her hair, or in her mouth, or in other unmentionable locations. "Rolled in your flab, worthless whore!" His words excited a number of his earlier supporters to growl in agreement. Though Egypt was far more modern than many ancient lands, the property earned by their cohabited arrangement the law would most likely list as Udium's alone. A small bribe to the nomarch's official or family's traditional chieftain most definitely would secure his right. Yet Mahu found the arrangement detestable. The woman had probably earned the lion's share of the jackal's proceeds, and now she seemed close to being cut out of her just deservedness. See the anger he arouses? I am lost without your protection. You sometimes harvest your wealth from in there? Mahu asked, seeking clarity. The snakes have no taste for Udium. I survive many bites. Mahu could tell here that they both were hiding the truth. They would neither wish to reveal a secret and allow someone else the chance to bypass the trap. He glanced down and could see the serpent slither, one starting to arch out in an attempt to free itself. If there was a second path of entrance, the snakes would have already used it. Mahu was reasonably assured that the container covered the only opening beneath. Yet the pit was shallow. Odium or Besrest probably could snare the snakes or pin them one by one with a forked stick before collecting a portion of their proceeds. When the time came, they might fill the pit with beer, drown the creatures to reclaim the full reward. There were enough serpents in the eastern desert to replace them easily. Their method Mahu didn't need revealed. Any act would take a respectable amount of methodical time. These two didn't seem capable of trusting each other alone with that opportunity for long. Mahu had just a few more facts to ascertain. "When you run out of beer, who goes to get it?" "Delivered here, each day fresh," the man Udium grunted. "We lived here together, seldom leaving. Peddlers visit us. Each day I draw water. Not this morning." An interesting puzzle, but not without a solution. Very similar to the golden falcon my overlord found missing in the funeral temple of Amenhotep. The mention of the last pharaoh's name made many in the room fall prostrate. Udium and Besrest were not among them. Mahu could almost admire them for this. As a foreign-born war captive, he thought much of the Egyptian pantheon, especially the worship of the king, quite self-indulgent. "Maybe the snake god Set took the contents as a sacrifice," Besrest offered in explanation. Mahu was certain now she was guilty. Her explanations were too contrived. Her excuses and pleas practiced. Udium was undoubtedly a shrewd judge of character himself. No one could have operated a brothel and loan-sharking in this slum without knowing the hearts of those he intoxicated. There was only one last test, a ritual. Mahu would divine the explanation, though he had no delusions he had mystical powers. Such grandstanding helped secure his own reputation as Thebes' greatest mystic, earning him an easier life than he would otherwise have, digging tombs or dredging canals. This deck of cards was handed to me by the dying hand of my father, who took it from the lifeless hand of his, and then again, dating back to the birth of man. Sure, he exaggerated, but it could be true. Mahu did receive his fortune-telling deck from his own father. The rest was embellished conjecture. Mahu disliked lying, preferring to let others draw a wrong conclusion when it suited him. He was so accustomed to the many tells associated with deceit that he was too familiar of them in himself to utter a falsehood. These are not papyri like the artifacts of Amun, but images tattooed on the thinnest of skins. By the time his explanation reached outside, observers reported that he was flipping a set of cards drawn on the sliced skins of human sacrifices. Mahu curled his legs beneath him as he sat next to the viper pit. His two combatants sat a head and shoulder below and before him. "Touch the top card lightly." Mahu observed each hand quiver as Udium and Besrest obeyed. He had suitably made his powers known. Mahu did not need to magically know the future, speak to the dead, or reach into a man's ka, or soul. But in many ways he did just that, with simple forensics, interrogation tells, and penetrating logic. The deck was merely a device to force people themselves to reveal their sins. 9 of Seas. I see your journey has been long together, but also very stormy. 3 of Sands. You are not related by blood, and I dare say you have not been intimate. Intimate? I sleep no trollops. He thinks he will buy himself a real wife some day, but now his filthy lucre is all gone. Metal is the root of all evil. Egypt had no true coinage, but metal being rare, recognizable, and for the most part non-transmutable, was frequently used in barter. Wages, paid often in a stipend of food, would waste away, so early on tallies of bread were exchanged for beads, later tokens, and in a few hundred years after the story, actual denominations of coins. "Let him finish," Udium said, his voice cracking from the mummery he faced. 4 of Seas. We seem to have a pattern. Mahu pointed to the buckets of water a maid carried in the card's image before looking at Besrest. "So, I fetch the water. This is the reason I stand accused?" "Not this morning. You say now on I do this on my own. She wish me die of thirst." These last words he spoke directly at Mahu. He thinks in the time he goes to the corner well and draws a bucket that I emptied the treasure below. He knows that's impossible." "I agree," Mahu stated, to Besrest's glee and Udium's resignation. "This next card, a 5 of Sands, tells me your treasure is safe, exactly where you put it." Before either could protest, Mahu made a request. "My trance is fading somewhat. Perhaps you can have someone fill my cup?" Mahu tapped the ceramic flask on the packed dirt floor, raising no dust. He looked around at the sandals and bare feet of many of the room's occupants, smiling that they seemed ruddier than typical. He also took note of the ceramic beer jar. The bottom was smudged with freshly turned soil. "Metal card, the tower. A prison of which nothing escapes. You live here, eat here, do your business here. You never leave?" "I did last night," Udium commented, "to collect my shake-shake." "Yes, but we sorted it together as we tossed it below." "I dare say that this next card, the 7 of Sands, would reinforce that claim." The card actually meant something quite different, at least as his father had taught him. But Mahu pointed at an image in the background of the card, and all seemed to agree the card proved his point. While everyone focused on the last, the next card Mahu palmed before placing it onto the ever-growing pile. A solitary torch of fire! What do you think that means? He could see perspiration start to appear on Besrest's eyebrows. The ancient Egyptians were a people suited for their warm land. Heat and the cramped room alone did not make her sweat. "At night we mark the house to let people know the beer is fresh. By morning the torch is extinguished." "That's the only way I know where to come," one of the onlookers remarked. Mahu turned to see who spoke, as the man tried to conceal himself behind another. "Your leg is bruised. You fell coming here last night, didn't you?" "Heavenly Thoth, you see yesterday as well as today." The man fled the bar to Mahu's laugh. Mahu guessed that, like many, the man had padded his way down the dark and winding streets, finally drawn to the torch. But last night something was different. A whistled tune would seem to pass more quickly, as the bar would be reached sooner than later. "These pictures in red paste, they are very good." "Thank you," Besrest remarked. The change of his attitude helped to ease her worry, but she was not ready for his next question. "Did you have much trouble copying them next door?" She could not answer. Udium looked about him in the soft light and finally discovered what Mahu concluded earlier. He wasn't here yesterday night. Most of the surroundings were identical, but a few long-remembered stains were suddenly absent in his memory of previous night's lodging. "You bitch! Master Mahu's spirits speak. The torch was not lighting my home." "No, you probably spent yesterday 1 or 2 down. There I'm sure you will find a cloth, hastily covered with dirt. Underneath will be your treasure, along with a second set of snakes. This last card, the metal card world, is upside down. That was the one which told me the whole truth. When you went for morning well water, she dragged the beer jar back and waited for your return. A clever hoax, capable of fooling a drunk in the dark, but today Aten is high and penetrating. I will say you missed your calling as an artist. Shall we go see how closely the paintings of last night's hall match?" In the end, Udium and the mob were correct from the start. At least now there was a trial, and there would be no doubt. Mahu was sullen but resigned about the outcome. The woman herself tried to circumvent the law by stealing. Such was her undoing. Maybe she should have trusted the nomarch, but, agreed, he was not of a mind to listen to prostitutes. As Mahu strolled away with a final jug of beer, he pondered the spiritual arrow of greed. Such a quantity of metal in the possession of an outsider was unseemly. Mahu would tell his own master Fentu and see that the metal was properly confiscated for safekeeping. He sauntered away to his further day's fortune readings as the trial's onlookers, spurred by odium, began to toss the first legally retributive stones.